Welcome back. Tonight's video features a new set of Reddit horror stories, accounts of strange encounters, unsettling moments, and experiences that are difficult to explain. Turn the lights down, settle in, and let's begin. Emma is an extrovert. Emma was an extrovert, but she hadn't always been one. I suppose it's my fault we drifted apart in the end. The truth was, I fell for all that bullshit. I listened to that voice, the sneering one that nipped at the back of my ears with its sharp incisors, the one that asked, "Why is your only friend a girl?" I fell for the indoctrination every 12-year-old boy does. And it wasn't like she was a tomboy, either. She was a real, proper girl, complete with the star and heart-shaped hair clips, sweeping blonde bangs and posters of horses and boy bands all over her purple-painted walls. She liked fairies, she liked unicorns. I liked her anyways. She was funny, and she always asked me questions, and she always shared. She was quiet around others, her long face always pointed down at her shoes, but she wasn't like that with me. It was my fault we drifted apart. But I couldn't stand how they looked at us, all of them, when we were playing together next to the basketball courts. I didn't like how the girls scoffed, how the boys shouted things I couldn't quite make out and then shoved each other, laughing uproariously. But the worst were the adults. I saw the looks they gave each other when Emma and I showed up to class side by side, secret looks, but I knew what they meant. Hope we get invited to the wedding, right? So I stopped hanging out with Emma. I made new friends, boys who liked soccer and spitting contests, and the looks and whispers stopped. And Emma stayed alone. That was until high school. When we got to high school, I started to notice that Emma had changed. At lunch, when I went out to the front lawn with my friends to toss a frisbee back and forth like wannabe college kids, I started to see her with other people. When I passed through the halls, I saw her with boys leaning against lockers, laughing and placing her hand on their shoulders. Every day it seemed like there were more people, more friends, surrounding her like a school of fish around a shipwreck. This wouldn't be unusual, except that Emma was always such a small, timid girl. She had been a loner since she was tiny. This was when I truly realized I didn't know who she was anymore. I didn't necessarily miss her anymore. It had been years since we had so much as spoken to each other, but it still gave me a strange pang in my chest to think it. Emma was an extrovert now, I realized. She was nice to everyone. A huge smile was always pulling at her glossy lips. Her hair was always perfect, falling in little swoops at her shoulders. She wore bright pinks and oranges and blues in the form of tight skirts and frilly blouses. She was attractive to the boys in an approachable way, but so nice to the girls that she was never considered a threat. Just a friend. Even from a distance, I could observe that everyone liked Emma. How could you not like Emma? At graduation, I looked for her. While I was accepting my fake diploma up on the stage, my friends and family cheering for me from the sea of faces, I searched the crowd for Emma. I spotted her quickly. Near the back, someone was talking to her animatedly, a girl with a tight brown ponytail and braces, and she was smiling a strange smile, but she wasn't responding. Instead, she stared straight forward. I felt my face get a little hot. Was she looking at me? Should I wave or something? But when I squinted my eyes, I could tell that it wasn't me she was looking at. She was looking somewhere behind me. After the ceremony, I looked for her again. I tried to part the mass of bodies, muttering excuse me's and sorries as I went. She was surrounded by a throng of her peers, all speaking so loudly and cheerfully that I couldn't make out anything she was saying. I got a glimpse of her face for a split second. She was smiling in that same strange way, almost sad. I finally heard her say something, her pink lips parting like they were crumpled up as if she was crying. "I'm going to miss you also, so much." Then came college. Emma and I ended up at the same school, one that was far enough away from home to feel like a grown-up, but not far enough to actually be one. In college, I saw her less, so I thought of her less. College was much bigger than high school, and I had much more to think about than my old childhood friend. But when I did see Emma, things seemed the same. Always surrounded by people, always smiling. I made new friends. I tried out for the soccer team, and I made it. My grades were okay, B to C average, and my roommate was weird, but he always left me alone. I felt content with the little life I had been building. That was until the party. It was by no means the first college party of the year, nor the craziest. I was told it would be just a couple of kids at one of the houses on campus, being rented out by seniors, but in typical college party fashion, it got out of hand pretty quickly. I went with a couple of my own friends, and we mostly stayed in the kitchen, crammed into the corner with mystery drinks clutched in our hands. The whole place reeked of smoke, and all the light bulbs had been changed to colored ones, giving the house almost an eerie nightclub vibe. It wasn't anything special, but feeling the warm buzz brought on by a mixed drink in a red plastic cup, crouched in a stranger's kitchen with new friends, I was feeling pretty good. I knew when Emma got there. I could claim I sensed it, like it was some sort of psychic superpower, but I just knew by the chatter. The air suddenly felt livelier, and people funneled from the kitchen to the living room, calling out greetings. My friends and I used the temporary quiet in the kitchen to get ourselves fresh drinks, and then we filed out to the porch to smoke. My warm feeling only grew, and soon I was laughing so hard I felt I might piss myself, elbowing my friends in the way that's only okay when you're drunk. The music thumped from inside the house, muted by the sliding glass door, and I didn't even feel the cold. When we finally decided to go back inside, I was surprised to find the kitchen entirely empty. I frowned and checked my phone. It was only around midnight. Why would everyone be gone? That was when I heard someone shout from the other room, and my friends and I eyed each other. I felt a guilty twinge at how excited the prospect of a fight breaking out made me, but I wanted stories. I wanted the college experience. We all rushed into the living room. And that was when I saw her. Emma was on the table, and everyone in the room was facing her, as if she were a caged animal in the zoo. She was on her hands and knees, but in a way that told me she'd been standing up before, clutching a clear bottle in one hand and the edge of the table with the other. I watched, horrified, as she retched over the side, wobbling back and forth like a swaying ship. Everyone shouted in dismay and crashed backwards towards the wall, wanting to avoid the splash zone, and I was very nearly forced out of the room. "And no," she moaned, wiping at her mouth with the back of her hand, the bottle clanking against her shirt buttons. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Clearly, she had had too much to drink, and I wondered what I had missed before we'd come in. My friends were laughing, nudging each other and me, but I didn't join them. Emma keeled over, flopping pathetically on the table as someone shouted, "Get down," their voice brash and cruel. Someone else laughed. Someone else started taking pictures of her. I had never seen her like this, and I had never seen anyone be mean to Emma, not since middle school, at least. I like to think I saw her wet skirt before anyone else did, at least. I hope that's true. I would hate for everyone there to remember their last time seeing her alive as her slumped over on someone's table, pee trickling down her legs and pooling at her hip, hugging an empty bottle like a teddy bear. I shoved through the crowd on an instinct, ignoring my friends' questioning shouts trailing after me. I reached Emma in a few seconds, gently trying to pry the bottle from her hands and pull her from the table. She finally acknowledged me when I scooped her up into my arms, wincing at the wetness soaking through my shirt sleeves. Her eyes fluttered open and she stared up at me, her eyes glazed over. "And Andrew," she slurred. I nodded, my face made of stone. The people all around us let out a collective ooh, and I was back in middle school, letting go of Emma's hand, refusing to look her in the eye. I looked her in the eye then, though, and she smiled in that sad way that only I seemed to ever notice. Then she threw up on my shirt. I got her to the bathroom, and I locked it behind us as thralls of people pounded against it with their fists, chanting our names. Emma and Drew. Emma and Drew. We've become the most interesting thing at the party, I thought. We've become the spectacle. Emma sobbed as I helped her into the bathtub, figuring it would be the easiest to clean off later. Emma's head fell back against the tile and she groaned. I silently slipped off my shirt and scrubbed at it in the bathroom sink, choking back my own bile as I did. I wasn't drunk anymore, or at least, I didn't feel it. "Andrew," she whispered after a long time. I looked over at her. She had pushed her blonde hair away from her eyes, stringy with spit and vomit. She stared up at me, watery and trembling. "Yes, Emma." I gave up on my shirt inside, shaking it out and pulled it back on. I shuddered at how it clung to my skin. I'm sorry. It's okay, Emma. I closed the toilet seat so I could sit on top of it, next to where she was laying. Are you okay? She shook her head quickly and then slower. Her eyes opened wide and I recognized something new in them, fear. I ruined everything, she whispered, frantic, her voice frayed around the edges. I frowned and leaned closer, wanting to hear her. What do you mean, you ruined everything? Maybe I wanted to, I dunno. She buried her face in her hands, whimpering into them. Maybe I meant to, Andrew. Maybe I'm sick of this. Maybe I can't do it anymore. Do what anymore? I pleaded, a little bit alarmed. She was rocking back and forth now, her breath coming in raspy wisps. She peeked at me from between her fingers now, as if she were surveying me. She hiccuped, and that somehow triggered a new wave of blubbering sobs, tears dripping from her chin like fat raindrops. I used to be so jealous of you, she sniveled, wiping at her red nose. You had so many friends, and I couldn't have any of them. And then I was jealous of you, 'cause you didn't have to have any. My eyebrows furrowed almost a painful amount, and I searched her face, unsure if I should feel offended by this or not. The pounding on the door continued. Emma. Emma, what do you mean, Emma? I don't understand. Her eyes glazed over, her tears still falling, and she stared through me at the bathroom door. Half there, half not. It follows me, she whispered, so weak I could barely hear her. Her breathing quickened. What follows you? She shook her head and pulled at her hair. Finally, her eyes met mine again, as if she were phasing back into reality. It's in them, she spit, jabbing a finger at the door. It's in all of them. It's watching me always, it always knows. When I don't have any friends, it gets angry. Emma, Emma, Emma. I could do nothing but stare at her, trying to figure out if she was serious or not. She must have still been pretty drunk, but right then, she seemed stone cold sober. I have to have friends, she continued, the tears never slowing down. I've done all my research. I wear the right clothes, I go to their houses, and I peek through their windows. I know what they like, what they don't like, I have a binder. Everyone I meet is in my binder. Everyone has to like me, Andrew, or it'll kill me. I know it will. It gets closer every time I lose a friend. It started with you. I felt suddenly very cold. I heard the words she wasn't saying. You were the very first friend I ever lost. I thought of her at graduation, staring at something that wasn't there behind me, that strange smile on her face. And I started to believe her. Emma, Emma. Emma, Emma, bang, 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 bang. And now they all hate me, she sobbed bitterly, hugging herself. I did it to myself, all of that work in one night. One night, one mistake is going to kill me. It's going to kill me now, it's going to kill me. No, it isn't, I heard myself say. I kneeled next to her, catching her franticness like a cold. No, it's not, you're safe in here. It's going to kill me, she mumbled. I wasn't sure if she even heard me. All that work, and it's going to kill me. You're safe in here, and I'm your friend. I'm still your friend. I reached out, and I took her hand. Her skin was white and cold, as if she was already dead. Emmy, me, bang, 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 bang. The voices had all morphed into one horrific amalgamation. The door hinges creaked and shuddered, like they were only just clinging on. The lock rattled. Emma let out a little shriek. Without thinking about it, I climbed into the bathtub with her and pulled the curtain shut. I didn't care anymore about getting any of her bodily fluids on me. Besides, it was too late for that anyways. She stared at me. Her eyes looked almost gray, and they were shiny, flickering with something I had never seen before. It'll happen to you next, she told me, her voice solemn. I don't know how I know, but I do. I'm sorry, Andrew. It's okay, Emma. Bang, 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 bang. For what it's worth, I wish we stayed like we were. She scooted closer to me, resting her head on my shoulder at an awkward angle. I do too. Then the bathroom door gave way. When the police arrived, I told them the truth. I didn't know what else to say. I was far too out of it to make up a story. So, after hours of interrogation and psych evaluation, I was finally released to go home and scrub her blood off of me. Probably because it was impossible to fathom how I, one boy, could possibly do to her what was done to her. It brought me no relief. A week ago, I went to her old house. It was a 2-hour drive away, about a block away from my old house. Her mom was there and she let me in, teary-eyed. She remembered me. "Would you mind if I went through her things a bit?" I asked her, my voice gentle, but I couldn't force much emotion into it. I was still reeling from what I'd experienced at that party. "I think there are some things she would want me to have." Her mother just nodded and led me to her room. It was exactly how I remembered it. Purple wallpaper, adorned with various brightly colored posters, unicorn figurines and stuffed animals covering the bed and the carpet. Untouched, she has still been such a little loser, even in high school, when I had thought she was so cool. I rifled through her drawers until I found it, a purple binder. I almost smiled at the butterfly stickers decorating the surface, one scratch away from peeling off completely. I flipped through it slowly. She hadn't lied. She really did do her research. Everyone from our high school was in there, their pictures taped haphazardly next to lists and lists of things about them, things that Emma never should have even known. She had been trying desperately to save her own life. When I got to my own entry, I hesitated. There was significantly less content on my page, as if she'd decided it wasn't even worth it. My picture, cut straight out of the yearbook, seemed to look right at me. A thought flashed into my head then, burning behind my eyelids, and tears began to form. I wiped them away quickly, alarmed. "You are so alone." And somewhere far away, I could hear it, pounding against wood, chanting, "Andrew, Emma, Andrew, Emma, Andrew." My sister brought home a stray dog. There's something terribly wrong with it. It had been raining for most of the day. Yesterday's forecast was for a light shower, but this was torrential. I peeked out the window, and in the darkness of the late afternoon, I could see a river of rainwater cascading down either side of the street. My parents were getting worried about my sister. Emily had spent the day at a friend's house and was supposed to be back an hour ago. Just as my dad was about to get in his car and go for a drive around the block to find her, the front door opened. Emily walked in dressed in her yellow raincoat. Much to my parents' chagrin, she was holding onto the worn collar of an old, soaking wet dog. The thing was a mongrel, but I could make out the Alsatian in it. Maybe some golden retriever. As I tried to work it out, I made a mental note to put dog breeder down on my list of career interests for school. My parents exchanged apprehensive glances as Emily smiled awkwardly and explained how she found him shivering in the rain on the side of the road. There was something about its eyes, she said, that made her instantly feel sorry for the poor guy. My dad knelt by the dog and had a look at its collar. It was battered, its red color fading, and it had no name, phone number, or address written on it. My father stood up with a sigh and told Emily that he'd bring the mutt to the vet on Thursday to see if it had been chipped. And, for the 5 days until then, looking after it would be her responsibility. Emily beamed at my dad and took the dog into the kitchen to towel it down. Later on that evening, she brought it back into the living room and informed us that his name was Buster. My father warned against getting too attached, but she didn't listen. She spent the rest of the day playing with Buster and sending pictures of him to her friends. That night, Buster slept on a makeshift bed of old blankets and cardboard in the kitchen. My parents prayed that he wouldn't make a mess of the place at night. Emily hugged Buster and gave him another treat before rushing off to her room. In the morning, all was well. It looked like Buster hadn't moved an inch. The dopey guy barely looked up at us when we crowded into the kitchen for breakfast. Immediately, Emily knelt beside him, rubbing his tummy and stroking his fur. I think Emily was too afraid of taking Buster for a walk, just in case she bumped into his owners and they dragged him away from her. The garden had been turned to mud the day before, and there wasn't a chance in hell that my mother would let that dog back in the house if he had a trace of muck on his paws. So he, like the rest of us, spent that day cooped up inside, not that he seemed to mind. My dad cooked up a lamb chop for Buster that night, at Emily's request. It was the most animated I've seen him. His eyes lit up as it was placed in front of him, and we all erupted into laughter as he tore into it. That night, I jolted awake. The radio alarm clock on my bedside cabinet informed me, in analog red light, that it was 4:37. I lay there, but quickly began to fall back to sleep. As I could have sworn I heard something moving around in the hallway. I assumed it was my dad, stumbling to the bathroom in a drunken stupor, and for the second time that night, sleep took me. I spent most of the next day hanging out with friends around town. We rode our bikes, threw stones at the windows of the old house on Mill Street, and dared each other to shoplift from the local off-brand gas station. I made off with a packet of apple-flavored chewing gum. When I came home, things felt different. Hostile. I didn't want to ask what happened, but before I could slink off to my room, my mother told me. Emily had accidentally knocked over my grandfather's urn while playing with Buster in the front room. I suppressed a chuckle at the thought of how much trouble she'd be getting in. Mature of me, I know. That evening, there was silence around the dinner table, broken only by Buster's whining. I woke up again that night. This time, I swung myself out of bed. My mouth was dry and my breath left a stale taste at the back of my throat. I wandered downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I tried to be as silent as possible, not wanting to disturb the sleeping dog. Buster slept soundly in his little bed, and I knew a freight train going past wouldn't wake him. I poured a glass of water and drank it in a continuous gulp. Then, an idea came to me. I crouched by the cabinet my dad kept his whiskey in. I opened it, trying not to let the hinges creak. I picked out a bottle and stood up. I gently unscrewed the cap and took a sip. I coughed and choked and spluttered. As I went for another sip, I heard movement upstairs. I knew my father would kill me if he caught me drinking. I hastily put the cap back on and placed it back in the cupboard. I walked out the kitchen, desperate not to make a noise. Just before I began ascending the stairs, I heard the door to my parents' room open. I quickly turned around and hid in the living room. I heard my father walk down the stairs and into the kitchen. My heart was beating like a tribal drum as I hurried out of the living room, and I stepped, agonizingly loudly, up each creaky step back to my bedroom. I thought I had made it, but just as I was pushing my bedroom door open, I heard a voice behind me. It was my father. He'd popped his head out of his bedroom. He asked if it was me moving around. I told him that I'd just gone downstairs to get a glass of water. He told me to keep it down, and before he retreated back into the darkness of his room, I saw my mother stirring in the bed behind him. He closed the door. That morning I woke up with a migraine. Nothing too major, but it was a drawback from what would have otherwise been a great day. My sister was at some dance club, my mother was visiting the solicitor in town, and my father had gone golfing. On this rare occasion, I had the house to myself. Well, me and the dog. I found a strongly worded note on the kitchen table when I woke up. It was left by Emily, telling me how I should feed and entertain Buster while she was gone. I crumpled it up and attempted to throw it into the bin from across the room, missing horribly. I made myself the unhealthiest breakfast I could think of. I took it into the living room to eat while I settled down to watch a film, Dan O'Bannon's Return of the Living Dead. That's how I spent the morning. Later on, I took my empty plate into the kitchen. I figured if my mother saw that I cleaned the dishes, she wouldn't be as critical when she found the crumbs. I walked past Buster, who was slumped in his usual stop in the corner of the room, on a bed of now dirty sheets. In a joking manner, I asked him how his day was while I washed up. Obviously, I got no reply. I remembered my sister's note and set a half-dried glass down while I fetched Buster some treats. I didn't know where Emily kept them, so I grabbed a slice of overly processed ham from the fridge. I crouched beside him and dangled it in front of his snout, teasing him. There was no response. No slow opening of the eyelids, no methodic wag of the tail. There were no signs of life at all. I gasped and put my hand on his stomach, trying to feel it rise with his breath or a heartbeat, anything. To my horror, his abdomen began to compress when I did, like a limp, deflating balloon. He felt hollow. Empty. I scrambled to my feet and stumbled backwards. As I put my hand on the counter, I knocked over a glass. It shattered on the kitchen floor, but Buster didn't so much as flinch. I panicked and ran up to my room. I took my phone from my bedside cabinet and hastily rang my mother. It rang for a brief moment before she picked up. I managed to stutter out that there was something wrong with the dog, that it was an emergency. She assured me that she had just picked up Emily and would be home in 10 minutes. And with that, she hung up. I set my phone down and paced around the room. As I was thinking, I heard a noise coming from the first floor. It sounded like someone moving around. I assumed it was my mother, home earlier than she estimated. I made my way downstairs to greet her, hurrying over the creaking steps. There was no one. The door was still locked, and I, as far as I knew, was alone in the house. I heard the now familiar wag of Buster's tail as he came bounding up to me from the hall. I looked at him puzzled as he nestled his head into my leg. I stroked him behind the ears as he mewed low. I then heard the equally familiar jangling of keys as the front door was unlocked. My mother stepped inside, pumping her umbrella. Emily, who was close beside her, ran to Buster and dropped to her knees as soon as she saw him. She hugged him tight and whispered in his flea-bitten ear. I could see her eyes were red, raw from crying. My mother asked me what the big emergency was, and I paused before answering. I explained that he had been unresponsive, but he seems fine now. My mother let out a long, drawn-out sigh as she made her way past us and into the kitchen. She called my name, frustrated, when she saw the broken shards of glass on the kitchen floor. I had forgotten about that. Emily spent the rest of the day in her room with the dog. At dinner, neither me or my mother mentioned anything about Buster's false alarm. We just let my dad witter on about improving his backswing, whatever that meant. For the third night in a row, I jolted awake in the small hours of the morning. I groaned at the abrupt ending of a good dream, tossing and turning until I found a comfy position. As I tried to get back to sleep, I began to feel a presence. It was the feeling you get during an awkward silence, when you become painfully aware of the other person. I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes, trying to adjust them to the darkness. There was someone in the corner of my room. I was certain of it. I could make out the vague shadow-covered silhouette standing just beyond the foot of my bed. I was almost paralyzed with fear, but my right hand managed to creep over to my bedside cabinet. I fumbled as I felt for the familiar switch of the lamp. Just before I turned it on, the figure in my room bolted. I recoiled in shock as I realized my half-asleep mind had been right. Someone had been standing there, watching. As the moon emerged from a bank of clouds, my room was briefly lit with a dull glow. In that half-light, I saw the outline of a tall man slink out of my room and into the darkness of the hall. I didn't realize I was screaming until my father burst into my room moments later. He switched the lights on, which burned my eyes. He held me and asked what was wrong. With snot and tears dripping down my face, I managed to stutter out that there had been someone in my room. At this, my dad turned and ran back into his room. His caring embrace was quickly replaced with my mother's. He emerged with a baseball bat in his hands, gasping it so hard his knuckles were white. My mother went to check on Emily. She made me come with her, not waiting to let her children out of her sight. Me barged into Emily's room. She was already awake, sitting upright in bed. My mother fired a barrage of questions at her. Dazed, Emily told us that she hadn't seen anything. My father came into the room 10 minutes later. He informed us that he did a sweep of the house and found nothing. No signs of a break-in, no mysterious intruder. He brought me back to my room. Once I was in bed, he sat by my side and explained to me that I probably just had a bad dream. He said there was nothing to be afraid of and joked that if someone did break into the house, they'd soon be scared off by Buster, the world's greatest guard dog. Eventually, I mustered the courage to fall back asleep. The next morning, everyone in the family was noticeably tired, even the dog. We greeted each other with yawns and joked about the previous night's events. I didn't know that this was the start of the last truly happy day of my life. My parents went out shopping, Emily took Buster for his first proper walk, and I spent most of the day gaming. It was a normal day. I've had dozens just like it. We had chicken breasts and bland steamed vegetables for dinner. Wednesday was family night, so after dinner we came together in the living room to play a board game. Tonight, it was Cluedo. Buster was curled up at Emily's feet. My father thought then was a good time to remind her that tomorrow he was bringing the dog to the vet, and would hopefully reunite him with his real owners. At this, Emily screamed that she was his real owner. She stormed out of the room, Buster following close behind. As soon as she slammed the door behind her, my dad signed. He said he knew my sister would get too attached to that dog. This was the sour note the day ended on. At 10, I did my usual routine. I brushed my teeth, changed into my pajamas, and listened to music for half an hour or so before turning over and going to sleep. As I expected, I woke up again in the middle of the night. This time, I was too afraid to move, too afraid to open my eyes and see what could be lurking in my room. Instead, I kept them tightly shut and tried desperately to go back to sleep. After laying in bed for what felt like hours, but must have only been 20 minutes, I decided to open my eyes. I was filled with a directionless dread as I slowly peeped out over my duvet. Since I had woken up, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I was being watched. As I pulled the covers away from my face, I saw who had been staring at me. My bedroom door was wide open, and sitting perfectly still in the doorway was Buster. His head was craned slightly and looking directly at me. I chuckled to myself, realizing that I had been terrified over nothing. I swung my legs out of bed and got up. I took Buster by the collar and began to lead him back downstairs to his bed. As I walked down the hall, I noticed that the door to my sister's room was ajar. I brought Buster into the kitchen and watched as he lay down on the crumpled mess of cardboard and old blankets that he slept on. I smiled as he slumped his head onto his paws and closed his dreary eyes. I wouldn't exactly call him my best friend, but I'd miss him after tomorrow. I turned to leave, to crawl back into bed and finally get some rest, but something caught my eye from out of the kitchen window. I leaned against the sill and looked out onto the cold night. The moon was a perfect crescent, half hidden by the clouds. Light pollution from the nearby city robbed the sky of stars, but as I stared into the darkness, I caught a glimpse of a shooting star. As I gazed in awe to see if I could see another one, I saw someone. There was a person leaning against the fence along our front driveway. I quickly realized it was Emily. I could make much out in the darkness, but I could see that she looked nervous. I was about to open the window and call out to her when I heard something behind me. I turned around and realized it was coming from the dog. I assumed he had yelped in his sleep, maybe stuck in some bad dream, but then I noticed something else. His skin was moving. Rather, there was something moving around just under the surface of his skin. I didn't have time to think what it could be before I saw the long, crimson-red fingers protrude from his stomach. They grabbed onto either side of the now gaping wound and parted his abdomen like curtains. Once the opening was wide enough, the unnaturally long arm reached out, snaking across the kitchen floor until it grabbed the dining table's leg. It held onto it tightly as it began to pull the rest of it out. I couldn't comprehend how something so large could have fit inside of that animalistic facade. Eventually, it was fully out and stood upright. The figure must have been at least 3 meters tall. It was hunched over where it met the ceiling. It looked like it had been skinned. Its lanky body was made up of exposed sinew and muscle. The thing's eyes were milk white and bulging out of its vaguely dog-shaped head. It was grotesque. With a streak of urine running down my leg, I turned around and ran as fast as I could upstairs. I burst into my parents' bedroom and stood in front of their bed, screaming and wailing about some monster. They were both shaken awake at my outpour of terror. My father was calm at first. He tried to sit me down and tell me that it had all been a bad dream, like the night before. I pushed him away and tried to articulate between screams that there was a monster downstairs and we had to leave. My father quickly became furious. His anger at me was only amplified by his tiredness. He grabbed my shaking hand and began to shout that at 14, I was too old for this. For any of this, but I was hysterical, and his attempt at reasoning did nothing. As I kept on wailing, he and my mother began to half lead, half drag me back into my own room. Kicking and screaming, I fell to my bedroom floor. I jolted at the noise of the slamming of my door and got to my feet. With tears streaking down my red cheeks, I pounded the door. I heard my father's voice on the other side pleading with me to calm down. Our shouting reached a fever pitch and then silence. We both stopped and listened out for the repetition of the noise that had brought our heated argument to an end. The dull, thudding noise came again, this time accompanied by a shrill creak. I realized it was the sound of something climbing the stairs. I took a tentative step back as the noise drew closer and closer. In a weak voice, I heard my father stutter, "What are you?" I knew what he had seen. I've spent the last 11 years blocking out the memory of what came next. There was screaming and pleading, the sound of flesh ripping and bone shattering. I sat motionless on the carpet of my bedroom floor as viscose blood began seeping in from under the door. The sounds or carnage stopped, and I held my breath as there was perfect silence once again. This silence was broken by the sound of my door slowly creaking open. I was petrified with fear. I could do anything. Couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. The thing opened my door a crack before stopping. The slowly thudding noise returned as it walked away from the scene until I couldn't hear anything more. I stayed welded to the spot for a minute or two before grief hit me like a bus. I began crying until my eyes were raw. I stood up and took my phone from my bedside cabinet. I dialed 911 and desperately tried to explain what had happened. I glanced out of my window and my jaw went slack. Walking down the middle of our street was the creature, caked in blood the same shade as its taut skin. Holding its hand and walking next to it was Emily. She stared up at it with affection. The two were illuminated by the street lights, and I saw that the creature was holding the fursuit that had once been Buster in the talons of its other hand. I watched as they walked down the street, across the sidewalk, and into the forest that surrounded my neighborhood. That was the last time I saw my sister. Within the hour, the police came. They cordoned off the area and took me in. I spent the next few years in foster care. The official statement they had given was that it was a kidnapping gone wrong. Only I, and the officers and coroner who saw my parents' remains knew that it was something much more sinister. That was 11 years ago. Tonight, I finish writing this before I begin a journey that I should have undertaken a long, long time ago. Emily is still out there somewhere, and I am going to find her. As a kid, I loved Sweden. As an adult, I fear it. As a kid, I thought Sweden was magic. The forests felt alive, not in a spooky way, in a storybook way. The moss was soft as carpet, the lakes so still they looked fake, and the sky had this pale blue clarity that made you feel like the world was endless. I used to stay with my Morfar grandfather in a little red cabin deep in the woods of Vamland. He'd wake me up early to pick lingonberries and tell me stories about trolls and skogsra, about old gods buried under rocks and lakes that could pull you under if you looked at them too long. I loved every second of it, every smell of pine, every wooden rune hanging in his home, every weird folk song he'd hum when the power went out, but that was when I was 8, back when magic felt safe. I moved back to Sweden this year. At 29, my Morfar passed away and left me the cabin. At first, I thought it would be peaceful, a chance to escape the noise of the city in USA, but now, I don't sleep, I don't go outside when it gets dark, and I don't look at the forest anymore, because something in it is watching me back. It started on the second night. I arrived late, just past 10 p.m., driving up the old gravel road with fog crawling across the trees like fingers. I unpacked, lit the fireplace, and tried to sleep. At exactly 2:16 a.m., I heard something. A knock, not on the door, on the window. 3 taps, even soft. Deliberate, I sat up in bed, heart thudding. Morfar's cabin only has 2 windows. One in the kitchen, one in the bedroom. The bedroom one is on the 2nd floor. I froze, didn't move, didn't breathe. No more knocks, no sounds of footsteps or branches cracking, just the wind. I eventually convinced myself it was a bird. A branch, sleep deprivation. I was wrong. Next day, I walked into town. Östra Ämtervik, population, probably fewer than 300. I grabbed some groceries, made small talk. Everyone was kind, in that distant, silent Swedish way. But when I mentioned the cabin, said I inherited it from old Rune Dahlström, the cashier's smile vanished. "You're staying out there?" he asked. I nodded. He just handed me my change and said, "Don't go outside after sunset." That night I stayed up, coffee in hand, lights on. Phone charged, nothing happened. Until 2:16 a.m. Exactly 3 knocks, this time on the kitchen window. Then laughter, not a person's laugh, not exactly. It was too slow, too spaced out, like someone who'd never heard a laugh before was trying to copy one. I stepped to the kitchen, heart jackhammering. There were no lights outside. But when I got close to the window, I swear to God I saw antlers. Big, pale antlers rising just above the sill. I backed away, didn't sleep. Didn't move. When the sun finally rose, the ground outside the kitchen was littered with dead birds. All their heads turned to face the window. I should have left, I wanted to, but something made me stay. I started finding carved symbols in the trees around the cabin, circles with 3 lines through them. A friend I emailed said they were ancient Nordic protection runes. Algiz, he called it, meant for warding off evil, but they weren't new. They'd been there for years. My Morfar had carved them, surrounding the property like a barrier. But some had been scraped out, like someone or something had clawed through them. 3 nights ago, I woke up in the woods, no memory of walking there, no shoes. Just me standing among the birches in complete silence. I wasn't alone. Something stood across from me, tall, thin, the antlers scraping against the trees above. Its eyes, no, not eyes, holes. Blacker than the forest around them. Its skin looked like bark, but it moved like it had joints. Too many joints. It whispered my name, not in Swedish, in my own voice. I ran. I don't remember getting back to the cabin, but I locked every door, turned on every light, and the next morning carved my own rune into the front door, deep and shaking. This morning I got a letter, no stamp, no return address. Just sitting on the porch. Inside was a note. It was in Swedish, but translates to, Papa, your grandson doesn't tea like me. I used to think Sweden was magic. Now I know it is, but not in the way I thought. There are old things here, things that live in the silence, in the fog, in the still lakes and crooked trees, things that remember names, things that wear the voices of loved ones, things that knock at 2:16 a.m. and they do not like when you leave. Or when you return. I'm leaving tomorrow, or at least I'll try. If you're reading this, don't go to Sweden, and if you have to, be careful. Especially at 2:16 a.m. That's all for tonight's stories. If you found them unsettling, consider liking the video and subscribing to catch the next batch. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear which story stuck with you the most. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.